Hello and welcome to the Bible study of the Gospel according to John. My name is Jacob. Today we're going to be talking about chapter 19 of John's Gospel. Last session we reviewed chapter 18, where Jesus was apprehended. He released himself. He allowed himself to be apprehended by the temple guards and Roman soldiers, led by Judas Iscariot, his disciple that betrayed Jesus, arrested him in the Garden of Gethsemane. This is the timeline, the prophetic timeline's culmination. His hour has come, and so Jesus allowed himself to get arrested, and he was brought before uh, Annas, the previous high priest, illegally, where they struck him and had no witnesses, legal witnesses to bear witness against him. Jesus spoke out against that or made a comment for that, and they struck him for it. And they brought him to Caiaphas, the current high priest, and then to Pontius Pilate because they wanted to have the capital punishment. They wanted him put to death. And the Romans had taken that authority from the Jewish people at this time. They no longer had the power to put people to death according to their law in Leviticus for blasphemy. So they brought him to Pontius Pilate, bringing erroneous accusations of Jesus, uh, claiming to half truths, mistruth accusations of Jesus, saying he's a king and opposing Caesar, and saying not to pay taxes and things like that. And so Pontius interviews Jesus and listens to the crowd, and Jesus tells Pontius Pilate ultimately, but because Pontius Pilate found no fault in Jesus. Pontius Pilate told Jesus, "Answer me, don't you know that I have the power to release you or the power to crucify you?" And Jesus said, "No power be given to you unless it was given from above. Therefore, those that brought me to you have created the greater sin." And so that led Pontius to want to release Jesus all the more. His wife had a dream that about Jesus and him being a righteous man and not to have anything to do with it. But through the pressure of the Jewish crowds and the potential of revolt, and also really the underlying pressure that he had already had gotten to hot water with Tiberius Caesar for a couple of missteps that he had in governing the Jewish people, as laid out in history. One example being that he had had this army procession into the Israel, and the soldiers holding the images of Caesar on the poles, and then the people protested because it was a graven image, and Caesar claimed to be God, and so they resisted against that. And Pontius Pilate had brought them all into Caesarea Philippi, all the Jewish leaders, and to speak with them, and then lock the doors and told them, if you don't relent, you'll be all killed at this moment. To Pontius's surprise, they all fell to their knees and pulled down their shirts and pointed to their necks and said, "Cut here, because we are not going to relent on this belief or this um, conscious burden, conscious thought, conviction that we're not going to allow that in our land." And so, basically, long story short, Pontius Pilate was told to remove that. He did. And he got in trouble for it. And so he's in hot water. He's had a couple of issues with Caesar in his governing. And so when they said anybody who claims to be king is no friend of Caesar, really pushed Pontius Pilate to the end of his rope. And we'll read more about that in the beginning of chapter 19 about how that plays out. But at this point, Jesus is being, you know, before these people to be questioned. And in chapter 19 picks up, and then Pilate took Jesus and flogged him. And so um, he did that to hopefully satisfy the Jewish crowds by severely beating Jesus. And there's different types of floggings. We'll talk about that a little bit more um, as we read through this chapter. I wanted to start this chapter study off by kind of recapping and looking through some of the Old Testament scriptures pointing to the sacrifice of Jesus, pointing to the Messiah's suffering on behalf of the people of the world. kind of recap some of the things that we've highlighted in the Bible study over the last over the different sessions. So we'll start with that because I wanted us to kind of talk about this, you know, things that pointed to this moment, that pointed to Jesus' severe scourging and the ripping of his skin and the beating that he took and the torture that he took and ultimately being crucified. So the word excruciating pain is actually derived from Latin word. And I just did a simple Google search, and it says here the word excruciating originates from the Latin word excruciare, meaning to torment or to torture, which itself means crux, meaning a cross or torture instrument of torture. So the word that we can think of that describes or qualifies the worst pain that we have is derived from the crucifixion. It's derived from the capital punishment practices of the Roman Empire that they borrowed from Persia. Persia had invented crucifixion, and the Romans perfected it. And so there's probably very little more excruciating types of death that can be thought of, that can be derived of as far as orchestrated capital punishment than crucifixions. So I kind of wanted to share that and help us load into our mind the type of, I mean, how extreme it really was that Jesus went through that, and explains a lot of his, of him talking about it and his struggle in the garden, a little bit of on his in his human nature, but then ultimately being the ultimate servant by relenting and saying, "Not my will, but your will be done, Father," and offering himself up and then committing to it. But yet he knew full well what he was walking into, and it was a free giving up of himself. So we're going to start by looking back at some of the Old Testament passages. We're going to start way back in Genesis chapter 3. And we've covered this in our session on the fall of man, and on throughout at times touching when we talked about the foreshadowing of the Christ throughout the Old Testament, who he is, what he's going to do, his mission. But in chapter 3, we find that this is after the serpent has deceived Eve and Adam, and they have fallen. They have eaten from the tree of good and evil, the knowledge of good and evil. And God has discovered this, and God is now proclaiming punishment or proclaiming the consequences of their rebellion and their disobedience. Remember, the serpent is not just an ordinary guard snake that we could think of, but it's the seraphim, which is a multiple meaning word that can describe a serpent, but it also describes the shining one, which heavenly bodies are often described in the Bible as twinkling, shining, bright beings. And so it's more than just a garden snake. So as we're going to pick up in chapter 3, verse 14, and God said to the serpent, "Because you have done this, cursed are you above all livestock and above all the beasts of the field. On your belly you shall go, and dust you shall eat all the days of your life. I will put enmity or war or conflict between you and the woman, between your offspring and her offspring. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel." So in this proclamation to the evil one, to the accuser, God speaks to him in his form there about all those things. But he also says between your enmity or a war between your offspring and woman's offspring, mankind, between the accuser and mankind. And Satan has offspring in sin, in the worldly systems, in the conversion of the fallen angels and things like that. There's a system that is at war with mankind. And so then God narrows it down between him and a man. He says, "And he shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel." So this was a death sentence. This was a death proclamation. God had told the serpent that a man's coming, and the wound he's going to hit you is a head wound. It's a mortal wound. And the wound that you're going to do to him is a wound to his heel, but it's not going to be mortal. It's not going to be everlasting or forever. So in this first few chapters of the Bible of the Word of God in creation and how it all started, we have a prophecy or foreshadowing of a man coming that will destroy the accuser, will put an end to the accuser. Further on in Genesis, we get to so just to back up, so throughout the Old Testament into the Old Testament, we have this intertwining this theme of the accuser and the promised one of God, and serpent always trying to sever the line of the promised one of God. And so on the promised one of line of God's side, you have this broad someone coming that is going to be a man from mankind. A man from mankind is going to be your ultimate demise. And then when we get to Abraham, God calls Abraham specifically out of the worship of the Chaldeans and the worship of the gods and things like that into being his servant and worshiping him. We have the advent of monotheistic religion, or certainly an example of it. And Abraham and God promises and has a covenant or a promise with Abraham that through your line, through Isaac, your son, who is promised. Abraham was an old man by the time Isaac was born. I mean, well into his 90s, um, and which is not very all. It's an improbable kind of thing. His wife was just as old as him, so to have this son born in their old age was an improbable miracle of God. And then God promising that through Isaac, all nations will be blessed because of that through Abraham, through Isaac, this promised line through a man, to a single man. Now we've narrowed down from mankind to a man. And we pick up in Genesis chapter 12, where God um, wants to test Abraham, and he tells Abraham to sacrifice his son Isaac as I'll frame up. Now, the context of this is God is already condemning and judging other peoples for sacrificing their children. So this is already contrary to the character of God. God had already promised that Isaac was going to be the promised line. Through Isaac, all nations will be blessed. So how then is God going to ask Abraham to sacrifice Isaac? And so Abraham, the book of Hebrews shed light on this, and Abraham had supposed that God perhaps would raise Isaac from the dead, or he knew, and so in Abraham's obedience, faithful obedience to this, he also knew and kept in mind God's promise, which sustained him through it. And we'll see hints of that in this reading. So we're going to go ahead and read, but this is, and we've discussed this in the past, but this is one of those books or chapters in the Bible where we scratch our head and say, well, why would God even have this in the Bible? Why this is against some of the things that we're reading, or this is out of character? Well, it's because this is a specific event in the real life of a person that foreshadows the coming Christ, the coming chosen one, and it illustrates just the magnificence of the brilliance of God's mind and Him being omnipotent, seeing all things. And so it says here, after these things, God tested Abraham and said to him, Abraham, and he said, Here I am. And God said, Take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains of which I shall tell you. So right there we see that God, the reason, the motive why, and Abraham doesn't know this, but the author includes this, that God's testing Abraham, number one. Number two, we're seeing that the first use of the word love in the Bible is the love of a father and a son. So isn't that amazing that first time that our Holy Scriptures ever mention the word love, it's the relationship of a father and a son, your only son. And he also qualifies Isaac as your son, whom you love, and who is your only son. And so at this point, Isaac is not the only son. He's the unique son, who's the unique one in the promise, but he's not the only son. He has an older brother, Ishmael, who was born Hagar, the handmaiden of Isaac's wife. Sorry, Abraham's wife, Sarah. And so, which is the peoples, the Islamic peoples originate from Ishmael, and which is the source of a lot of the debate and all the stuff between them. But and so the wording of that is very peculiar because Isaac, first of all, isn't the only son, and also God shares his first description of love is between a father and a son. So Abraham rose up early in the morning, saddled his donkey, and took two of his young men with him, and his son Isaac. And he cut the wood for the burnt offering and arose and went to the place of which God had told him. On the third day, Abraham lifted up his eyes and saw the place from afar. Then Abraham said to his young men, Stay here with the donkey. I and the boy will go over there and worship and come again to you. And so we already see they travel, they get there. There's other men with Isaac and Abraham, and And Abraham says, we're going to go there and we're both coming back. So it kind of illustrates or highlights the fact that he doesn't believe Isaac's going to be dead. Something's going to happen to allow him to come back. Number two, it says the boy, it's likely a young man. It's likely in a boy that's in their teens or even in early 20s, not to the point, and that's the description of the word used here for boy. It's not a young boy who can be pushed, can be physically pushed around, but it's a young lad or a young man. And so we have evidence of this boy submitting himself to the will of the father, being in obedience, could have easily resisted, could have easily overtaken his 90-something-year-old father and not participate in this activity. So Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it on his son Isaac. So there we have Isaac carrying the wood that would be part of his sacrifice. Jesus carried the cross as part of his punishment to Golgotha. Now we know that Simon the Cyrene had at some point been conscripted by the Roman army to pick up Jesus's cross and help Jesus carry it to Golgotha because of Jesus' extensive weakness and bloodletting and all that because of his flogging and scourging and torture. But we have a parallel there. Isaac carries his wood, Jesus carried his cross. And Isaac said to his father, my father, sorry, let me back up. And he took in his hand the fire and the knife. So they went both of them together. And Isaac said to his father, my father. And he said, here I am, my son. And he said, behold the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for burnt offering? Abraham said, God will provide himself the lamb for a burnt offering, my son. Again, Abraham indicating that something's going to happen. God's character is not for him to kill his son, but yet he asked it. So out of faith, he's following and obeying. So they went both of them together. When they came to the place of which God had told them, Abraham built the altar there and laid the wood in order, bound Isaac, his son, and laid him on the altar. Again, Isaac could have resisted at any point in this, on top of the wood. Then Abraham reached out his hand and took the knife to slaughter his son. But the angel of the Lord called him from heaven and said, Abraham, Abraham. He said, here I am. He said, do not lay your hand on the boy or do anything to him. For now I know that you fear God, seeing you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. So we have this plurality of this being, the angel of the Lord, which is often thought of as the pre-incarnated Jesus. It's his manifestation of him in a human form, anthropomorphic form, in the form of an angel. And then you can see in the wording some of that wordplay. I know that you fear God, seeing you have not withheld your son, your only son. Again, that language of your unique son, the promised son. And then he says, from me, as if he's God, which is the Christ. This is pretty amazing, deep stuff. And then Abraham lifted his eyes and looked, and behold, behind him was a ram caught in a thicket by the horns. And Abraham went and took the ram and offered it up as a burnt offering instead of his son. So Abraham called the name of that place, the Lord will provide. So this is a prophetic naming of the land. This mountain, Mount Moriah, is the same place that Jesus Christ will be crucified in the chapter we're going to be reading in the near future. So Abraham said, the Lord will provide, meaning provide himself the sacrifice. And it is said to this day, in the time of this writing of Genesis, which is written by Moses, on the mount of the Lord it shall be provided. Shall meaning the future. And the angel of the Lord called to Abraham a second time from heaven and said, by myself I have sworn. So again, the angel referring to himself as God, declares the Lord, because you have done this and have not withheld your son, your only son. I will surely bless you, and I will surely multiply your offspring as the stars of heaven and as the sand that is on the seashore. And your offspring shall possess the gate of his enemies, and in your offspring shall all the nations of the earth be blessed, because you have obeyed my voice. And so, again, God reveals again the promise through the line of Abraham, through the line of Isaac. And so this line continues to go and then it gets passed into the Israel people, right? The Israel people come from Abraham, and then it gets narrowed down to David's line. So in the book of Kings and in David's time, in Samuel, God promises to David that through his line, the Messiah will come. And so now we've got it narrowed down to David's line. And we have all these attempts on David's life through the Bible, which is again that and again you've got the Messiah line through history, and you've got Satan attacking that line all through history, trying to sever the line and stop the initial prophecy that would be his undoing. So the next scripture we're going to read is Psalm 22, which is written by David. So David has now received um, this promise that the Messiah is going to come through him. David is the musician. He writes poetry, he writes psalms. He wrote a number of the psalms. He's also called in the Bible a prophet. And this particular psalm is a prophetic psalm, is seen through by both the sages of the Jewish sages and Christian uh, writers and the Christian church and scholars. But this is a prophecy. This particular psalm was written. So David would have been alive. I'm trying to think of the time. I don't have it in front of me, but we're talking about, probably 1,000 years before Jesus' birth, approximately. Okay, so we've gone forward in history, and and David, writing in the Spirit, writes the psalm, and it says here, Psalm 22, to the choir master, according to the doe of the dawn, a psalm of David. My God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far from saving me? From the words of my groaning, oh my God, I cried day by day, but you did not answer, and by night, but I find no rest. Yet you are holy, enthroned on the praises of Israel. In you our fathers trusted; they trusted, and you delivered them. But they cried and were rescued. To you they cried and were rescued. In you they trusted and were not put to shame. But I am warned. I am a worm, not a man, scorned by mankind and despised by the people. All who see me mock me. They make mouths at me and they wag their heads. He trusts in the Lord. Let him deliver him. Let him rescue him, for he delights in him. Yet you are he who took me from the womb. You made me trust you at my mother's breast. On you was I cast from my birth, and from my mother's womb you have been my God. Be not far from me, for trouble is near, and there is none to help. Many bulls encompass me, strong bulls of Bashan surround me. They open their mouths at me like a raving and a roaring, like a raving and roaring lion. I am poured out like water. All my bones are out of joint. My heart is like wax. It is melted within my breast. My strength is dried up like a potsherd, and my tongue sticks to my jaws. You lay me in the dust of death. For dogs encompass me, a company of evildoers encircle me. They have pierced my hands and feet. I can count all my bones. They stare and gloat over me. They divide my garments among them, and for my clothing they cast lots. But you, O Lord, do not be afar off. O you, my help, come quickly to my aid. Deliver my soul from the sword, my precious life from the power of the dog. Save me from the mouth of the lion. You have rescued me from the horns of the wild ox. I will tell of your name to my brothers. In the midst of the congregation, I will praise you. You who fear the Lord, praise him. All you offspring of Jacob, glorify him. Stand in all of him, all you offspring of Israel. For he has not despised or abhorred the affliction of the afflicted. But he has not hidden his face from him, but has heard when he cries to him. From you comes my praise in the great congregation. My vows I will perform before those who fear him. The afflicted shall eat and be satisfied. Those who seek him shall praise the Lord. May your hearts live forever. All the ends of the earth shall remember and turn to the Lord, and all the families of the nations shall worship before you. For kingship belongs to the Lord, and he rules over the nations. All the prosperous of the earth eat and worship before him. Shall bow all who go down to dust, even the one who could not keep himself alive. Posterity shall serve him, and shall be told of the Lord to the coming generations. They shall come and proclaim his righteousness, and to the people yet unborn, this has been done. This has done it. So Psalm 22, again, is very, very descriptive on this suffering person that David is speaking about and how he is suffering. Um, there's been a actual medical study from the Journal of Medicine that reviewed the way Jesus Christ would have died on the cross, the manner of which people die via crucifixion, and they basically die of heart failure. You're stretched out with your arms above your thorax, and you've got to actually when you inhale, you've got to actually stand up and pull on the nails and with your feet via exhale because you inhale and you're being stretched out. Your diaphragm is stretched, and all those things are stretched, and you're not allowed to relax. And so it's an excruciating form of death that can take hours and days to pass away in with a normal healthy person. And basically, it leads into heart failure, and you get this cardiac tamponade, which is um, fluid around your heart and in the lining of your heart. And then also, he talks of being dehydrated, and so there's severe hydration that he's dried up like a potter, that his tongue sticks to the roof of his mouth. Um, he says that you've pierced my hands and feet, which is the manner of the crucifixion. Yet, crucifixion has not even been invented in the time of David. This is going it's going to be invented several hundred years later by the Persians. And so 1,000 years approximately before Jesus Christ, this this psalm was written down. And Jesus hanging on the cross actually begins to say this psalm. He says, he cries out on the cross, my God, why have you forsaken me? And rabbis at the time of teachings would actually sit down and recite the first couple of lines of a passage so that everybody listening that knows the Bible, because they did not have Bibles written before them to refer to, they'd begin to load in their mind the passages that this rabbi was going to be teaching on. And so Jesus on the cross pointed to this psalm in the midst of his suffering as, look back. It was written. This is happening. How do you reason with that? How do you reason with these things that are written thousands of years before what transpired and is written and recorded in history as historical fact by not only religious or Christians or people who believed Christ, but also by extra biblical accounts such as Josephus, Jewish Roman historian, or even some of the other Roman documents found at the time, that Jesus was a real man that was crucified for the sake of he was crucified because of what he said and because of what he proclaimed. So the next passage we're going to talk about. So as we see now, we've seen the threads, the messianic thread, and the accuser trying to cut off the line, and so Satan actually tried, as several attempts on David's life throughout recorded in the Bible was done, and then we go forward through the historical line of the Jews. You have it at a point where the Jews are brought into captivity, and Haman is to convince the king to exterminate all the Jews. And you have Esther, who goes to the king, who happens is a Jewish woman who's married to the king, risks her life and intercedes on behalf of the Jews um, through that time. And there's another attempt on the Jewish people's line to exterminate the Messiah. So the book of Daniel is a prophet. Daniel's a prophet that was around in the time of the exile. So Daniel was thought to be a young boy brought from Israel when the Babylonians overtook Jerusalem, brought him into captivity into Babylon, and he was brought into the high courts of the priests. He was blessed, not the priest, but the king himself, Nebuchadnezzar, and those folks. That whole story. And he was very loved by God, a prophet, and obedient to God. And God gives him a vision, And so this is the prophecy about the end times that was given to Daniel for the end times. Um, and so this prophecy is in Daniel chapter 9, and this is about the end times, about the end of history. And written, and it's centered around the Jewish people. What's going to be going on with the Jewish people in the end, at the end of history? 70 weeks are decreed about your people and your holy city. So people's Jews, holy city is Jerusalem, to finish the transgression, to put an end to sin, and to atone for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal both vision and prophet, and to anoint most highly placed. And so again, we've talked about this a little bit in our study. 70 weeks. It's a week is a cluster of 7 years, and so there's a whole there's 400 plus years from when the temple was rebuilt by Ezra to the coming of Messiah, and then there's this pause after this in the last before the last 7 years. So there's 69 sets of seven that have occurred in history, and then there's this one last week that is coming in the future, and that's what this ultimate this description is going to be at the end of this last week at the return of the Christ. Um, you're going to have an end to sin, atone for iniquity, everlasting righteousness. All those things are going to be a part of the millennial kingdom and beyond in the reign of the returned Christ. So let's just keep reading. Now, therefore, understand that from the going out of the word to restore and build Jerusalem to the coming of an anointed one, a prince, there shall be 7 weeks. Then for 62 weeks it shall be built again. So Cyrus gave Ezra and Nehemiah the okay to go and rebuild this, go back to Israel and rebuild the temple and rebuild their land again. Cyrus, incidentally, is actually prophesied before Cyrus was ever born, his actual name to being the king that released the Jews in Isaiah, by the way, which is amazing in and of itself. But going back to what I'm saying. So Cyrus releases them, they go and rebuild the temple. So Daniel's saying it'll be 60 after the 62 weeks, anointed one shall come. So all right, let me back up. There shall be 7 weeks. Then for 62 weeks, it shall be built again with squares and a moat. But in a troubled time, which just describes Ezra and Nehemiah's time. And after 62 weeks, so after the temple's built, 62 weeks later, which is 62 sets of 7 years, an anointed one shall be cut off and have nothing. So that's the Messiah. So exactly that number of years, fast forward to the future, is the time that Jesus is being crucified. We had a Sir Scotland Yard guy. I forgot his name now. His name's not coming to mind. I actually calculated the number of years and the dates on the calendar because we know the date that the Jewish people were released to go rebuild the temple because it says it in history. And extrapolated that time to the exact time of Jesus' presentation, and it comes out to be in April of the year 33 to the actual date, which is an amazing thing. So anyway, so after the 62 weeks, which is what we just described, and an anointed one shall be cut off and shall have nothing, and the people of the prince who is to come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. So Jesus is martyred. The anointed one is martyred in this time, and then the people of the prince, which is to come. So the Antichrist is to come. The Romans destroyed Jerusalem in 70 AD and the temple. And it kind of goes on from there about the Antichrist that will come in the future. And there's discussion and not theories, but different trails of thinking and thoughts on debates on the exact people group that the Antichrist would come from and things like that, which is for a different study. But I'm reading this to illustrate again in another place the anointed one, the chosen person of Israel will be cut off. It says cut off, which means killed. I mean that's pretty unmistakable. Okay, and so finally we're going to end with Zechariah chapter 12, and this is another prophet, latter prophet before the New Testament, Zechariah. This is a um, prophecy that's referred to a lot about the Jewish people as it relates to the Messiah. And it's one of those prophecies that has immediate implications and then also implications in the future, like many prophecies do. It kind of satisfies something in the near future, but then it also has speaks to something that's in the late future and later in history. It says here in chapter 12, verse 10, and I will pour out on the house of David and the inhabitants of Jerusalem a spirit of grace and plea for mercy, so that when they look on me, on whom they have pierced. There you go. So God's saying right there in his and from his perspective, when they look on me, then he says, on whom on on him whom they have pierced, they shall mourn for him as one mourns for an only child and weeps bitterly over him, as one weeps over a firstborn. And so we have this again ambiguous or not so ambiguous, but intentional, but seems weird wording, like we see all throughout the Old Testament of God saying me, but then says him or I, and then he. And so they said that God says they'll look at me, but then on him whom they have pierced. Who do they pierce? They pierce Jesus Christ, both in his hands and feet, but also in his side in the spear. And then the Jews. So this is the thing where there's some immediate fulfillment of this because those Christians, those people who believed Jesus was the Christ, did weep for him. It was a great mourning for him. Not all the Jews did, but there's a coming fulfillment where all Jews at the time, when Jesus returns, when Jesus reveals himself as their Messiah, they'll look back and mourn over the years and years um, of um, of not of rebellion against the Christ. So that's mostly what I wanted to show you today. We're going to actually, next session, we're going to read and start reading chapter 19 and read through it and do our normal flow of Bible study with it. Um, Easter's fastly approaching. I hope that this is something we can think about and pray about and meditate on, just the actual deed, the culmination of what he did, his mission, and really exactly what he had to go through for us. And then, um, what that really, really meant. By his stripes we are healed. So we're going to end with Isaiah 53. I definitely wanted to read that because looks like I missed that on the scriptures that I kind of pulled out. Isaiah 50. Start with 50 and then we'll go to 53 and we'll end. And after we end this, then we'll end all together. Applications, just think about and meditate on what the Messiah has done for you. Um, okay. So in Isaiah 50, this is talking about the serpent, God's chosen one. The Lord God has opened my ear, and I was not rebellious. I turned not backward. I gave my back to those who strike, and my cheeks to those who pull out the beard. I did not hide my face from disgrace and spitting. But the Lord God helps me, therefore I have not been disgraced. Therefore I have set my face like flint, and I know that I shall not be put to shame. He who vindicates me is near. So this begins to talk about the suffering of this chosen anointed one. This was written 800 years before Jesus existed, uh, incarnate, existed as created, as existed in history. And so, but although Jesus is all existing, but you hopefully understand what I'm saying. But 800 years before that time in history. So this talks about the Messiah, the suffering one, being spit on, being struck, having his beard pulled out. So his back given over to them. So the scourging is the instrument they use. It's a cat of nine tails instrument, and basically it has these leather. It's a whip with these leather thongs on it, and they'd have pieces of bone, broken shards of metal, or whatever they can get that would have cutting edges, piercing edges that would tear the flesh on the victims of who they scourged. It was a form of punishment. They had three different levels of that, and the last level was prior to crucifixion of capital punishment, and they would be used to punish and weaken their victims before crucifixion. And Jesus received this, and they would slice their back, but it would be two people that would whip them in succession up to 40 lashes. They would withhold the 40th one as an act of mercy, so up to 39 lashes, and they would say confess, and they would swipe them. And what they wanted to get out of the victims is them to blurt out what they've done wrong, how they offended and broke the law, and if the person would do that, they would relent. Um, but Jesus, you can just think about Jesus's predicament. He did not have anything to confess. He was innocent, and he took every one of those scourging lashes uh, that ripped his flesh. Even it was even described in his history and by the writings of the Romans that it would expose uh, tendon and bone, the vertebra, even organs. Many victims would die from this alone. So this is what it meant when it said in chapter 19 that Pilate had Jesus flogged, had Jesus scourged. This is what he received. The scourging. By his stripes we are healed. He gave his back over for us. And he had nothing to confess because he was, hurt. He didn't do any wrong. And so that's that. Gave his back over. So let's go to Isaiah 53, 52 to 53, the end of 52. Behold, my servant shall act wisely. He shall be high and lifted up, which indicates being lifted up. Jesus said in his teaching the people that he'd be lifted up, meaning like Moses, like the bronze snake in Moses' time, lifted up for all to see, to gaze upon. And he shall be exalted. As many were astonished at you, his appearance was so marred beyond human resemblance, and his form beyond that of the children of mankind. So Jesus was tortured to the point that he didn't even resemble a person. So shall he sprinkle many nations. Sprinkle is the word that's used to describe the blood sprinkling on the altar of atonement when priests would sacrifice the animals. Kings shall shut their mouths because of him. For that which he has not been told, they see, and that which that have not heard, they understand. After no other event in history changed the world like the story of Jesus Christ and what he's done. Western civilization was transformed and created. And to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? For he grew up before him like a young plant, like and like a root out of the ground. He had no form of or majesty that we should look at him, and no beauty that we should desire him. He was despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief, and as one from whom the men hide their faces, he was despised, and we esteemed him not. Surely he has borne our griefs and carried our sorrows, yet we esteemed him stricken, smitten by God, and afflicted. Accursed, cut off from God. He was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities or sin. He was pierced and crushed. Upon him was the chastisement that brought us peace, and with his wounds we are healed. We all like sheep have gone astray. We have turned every one to his own way, and the Lord laid upon him the iniquity of us all. So this whole idea of atoning, of taking the place of, is right here in Isaiah 800 years before Jesus and before the New Testament. We had talked about the whole Yom Kippur lamb and Passover and all that, where this idea of this animal taking the place of the sins of the people. At first for a household, then it became Yom Kippur for the entire nation, and now Jesus for the entire world. That's why he's referred to as the Lamb. We all like sheep have gone astray. We have turned everyone to his own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. He was oppressed and he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. Like a lamb that is led to the slaughter, and like a sheep that is before its shears, he is silent. So he opened not his mouth. Jesus was silent in the midst of the accusations, in the midst of the improper the accusations and questioning, and they made his grave with the wicked and the rich man in his death. So he actually, which is an interesting thing. So he was crucified among two people who who deserved to be crucified, but he was buried in a rich man's tomb, in the tomb of Joseph of Arimathea, a rich man's tomb. And so in this that prophesied that numbered among the wicked, but buried with the rich. Although he had done no violence, there's no deceit in his mouth. Yet it was the will of God, or the will of the Lord, to crush him and put him to grief. When his soul makes an offering for guilt, he shall see his offspring, he shall prolong his days. And the will of the Lord shall prosper in his hand. Out of the anguish of his soul, he shall see and be satisfied. By his knowledge shall the righteous one, my servant, make many to be accounted righteous. It's just, I mean, it's clear as day. Um, Atonement. One who doesn't deserve it, who's pure, taking the place of one that isn't. That's you and I. He shall divide the spoil with the strong, because he poured out his soul to death and was numbered with the transgressors. Yet he bore the sin of many and makes intercession for the transgressors. So again, it's clear, 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 clear. So clear that a lot of times rabbis will kind of, you know, dismiss this passage and not really teach on it and things like that because it's just so clear. So as we enter and get closer and closer to Easter, maybe we can kind of think about our Messiah, think about Jesus and what he did for us, and the actual extent of his suffering, and how that matters and why. It matters because sin is real, and sin is something that has to be dealt with. It's an offense and to a righteous, holy God. And so we all need that atonement. We need the blood sprinkled and covered over us because our misdeeds and our sin. And, there's nothing you can do to earn it. It's a gift. You just freely receive it after asking for it and believing. So I hope this has been helpful. I hope everybody has a wonderful week, and everybody take care. We'll see you on the next one.